COVID has had a huge impact on the life chances of young people, education, work, family. It means millions have missed out, and it seems those in the north of the country have been particularly affected. A disturbing report by my next guest shows that it could affect those young people throughout their lives, and I'm joined now by Professor Kate Pickett of York University. Good morning, Professor Pickett.
Good morning.
What were you trying to discover with the work that you did here?
Well, what we were trying to do was not so much discover, but synthesize, like put together all of the evidence about how children in the north were disadvantaged compared to their peers in the south and the rest of England before COVID, but also to look at the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on children in the north. So there's not a lot in this report that's brand new. I mean, a lot of us have known much of this evidence before, but it's the first time it's all been put together. And together, it makes a really disturbing picture.
So what are the headlines on that picture? What did putting the evidence together tell you that, we ought to be concerned about?
Well, it highlights how disadvantaged children in the north are in terms of their mental health, their physical health, their education, their life chances, even before COVID, and how disproportionately affected by the pandemic they have been. So they've missed more schooling, their mental health has been worse affected, their physical activity levels are lower. And we've also been able to put a cost on this. So we can see that unless we mitigate against that extra damage, that extra impact, we will see a scar across the life chances of those children, and that will affect their lifelong productivity and the productivity of the north of England in general. So if we want to really do the best for our economy, for levelling up, and for individual children, then we need to invest where it's needed most.
So to be clear on this graph that we're seeing, just to make sure I understand it properly, what you're saying is that in lifetime earnings, children at school now can expect to see something like 12,500, a penalty, if you like, because of
yes.
COVID.
Exactly.
Okay. You also had some data, I think, about the number of months lost, if you like, in learning advance.
That's right. So children in the north of England experience more restrictions, more months of restrictions than children elsewhere. And that affected their learning. And so we find that they've lost 4 to 5 months more of maths literacy learning than children elsewhere in England. So that's a really big loss.
If you had your way, Kate Pickett, what would you do to help those children catch up? What could we actually do about it?
Are you giving me a magic wand? Okay, if you're giving me a magic wand, I would ask the government to put children and families at the heart of the levelling up agenda and target their investment where it's needed the most, to the most deprived areas and to the areas most affected by the pandemic, and to invest in early childhood. And they could do things so easily. They could increase child benefit, top up the child aspect of the universal credit, child tax credits, fund family centres even more than they promised to do in the budget. So it's just a matter of directing their investment to the places that need it the most.
Let's stick with the Sky News magic wand for a moment, and you've got it. Last week we were in a town called Goole on the Humber, which is exactly one of the kinds of places that I think people will be talking about when they're talking about levelling up. In practice, what you've just said, how would that make a difference for a family in Goole, which currently maybe somebody's lost their job, where they feel that, in the jargon, they've been left behind? What would they see that would be different, that would help to close this gap that you've described?
Well, we know that all parents want to do the best for their children. And if you're feeling that your children's life chances are being hampered by poverty, by poor schools, by lack of services, that's incredibly stressful. And so I think even small amounts of investment into families' livelihoods can really reduce stress for parents, can really impact things like food security, housing security, enabling families to have the time and the care for their children and to be able to nurture them in the ways that they would most wish to. So fairly small amounts for families can make a big difference. And the kinds of investment that we're asking for, the kinds of recommendations that we're making in this report, really could tip the balance between children having the best start in life or children being in families where the chronic stress of poverty is really affecting everybody's life chances and well-being.
The major government player here is the relatively new Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove. Have you sent the report to him, and what would be your expectation of his response?
Our report's going to all relevant ministers and MPs. We already know that there's cross-party support for doing something about the recommendations in this report. I would ask him to come and talk to us, and I would ask him to make sure that children and families are at the heart of levelling up.